Hey everyone, and welcome to Plant-Based Cooking with John, your go-to channel for delicious plant-based recipes that won't break the bank. Whether you're a seasoned cook or just starting out, you'll find easy to follow recipes that use simple ingredients and basic kitchen equipment. On today's episode, we're going to be making the breakfast classic biscuits and gravy. All going to be vegan. We're going to use some delicious mushrooms for the gravy, and we're going to make the biscuits as well. So stick around. I'm going to try to make this as short of a video as possible, but there are going to be two components to this. Let's check it out. All right, let's go over the ingredients that we're going to be using for the recipe. To start off with the biscuits, you're going to need just some all-purpose flour. So I have this right here in the canister. Any all-purpose flour works. The next ingredient that we're going to be using is some kind of plant-based milk. I think oat milk is the best. So you'll have that nearby. The next item we're going to use is some kind of vegan butter. I have Earth Balance this time, so you'll want to use a little bit of that. You'll also want to use a lemon. We're going to squeeze this to make the buttermilk. I'll show you that because we're going to tackle that first. You'll also need some baking soda and baking powder. Oops, I switched them. Baking soda, baking powder. You'll need both of them in this recipe. And then salt, a little nutritional yeast to make the biscuits a little bit cheesy. If you don't want them to be savory though, you do not have to use this. And same with the herbs. If you don't want it to be savory, you just want to be plain biscuits. If you want to eat them with jam or something like that, you can keep them more neutral. Now, for the gravy, we're going to be using some vegetable broth. We're going to be using a little bit of that flour too to thicken up the gravy. But as far as veggies go, you're just going to want some mushrooms for the gravy. You'll want some garlic cloves. Here we'll need 3. You'll also want a white or yellow onion, such as this. And we're also going to use some walnut halves that we're going to grind down into like almost a dust. Okay? So let's get started. All right, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to set our oven. So make sure that you set the oven to 450 degrees. Now that the oven temp is set and it's preheating, we're going to first start by making the buttermilk. So you'll just need 1 cup of your plant-based milk. So you can pour that right in. And then we're just going to need 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. So I'm going to squeeze that right here into the milk. And what this will do is it'll create a curdling effect and make this milk nice and creamy. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And you can give it just a little stir. And then once you have that buttermilk made, you're just going to set this to the side. All right, the first thing we're going to do is add all of our dry ingredients together. So I have my flour. In this particular recipe, it'll take 2 cups of flour. And this will make about 6 to 8 biscuits. So this is a 1/2 cup measurement. I'm going to do 4 of these. All right, the next ingredient I'm going to add to the dry ingredients is 1 tablespoon of baking powder. Put that right in there. We also need a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. And 1 teaspoon of salt. This is a 1/2 teaspoon. So 1, 2. You also want 2 tablespoons of your nutritional yeast. 1, 2, and then as much herbs as you want. So I like it pretty herbaceous. So I'm going to shake. This is probably close to maybe 1.5 tablespoons. And then also, if you just want to add a little pepper, you can too. That's just a taste, your own discretion. We're then going to take a wire whisk and we're going to make sure that all the ingredients get incorporated together. Once your dry ingredients are all thoroughly mixed in, we're then going to take our vegan butter, and this is important. You want to make sure that the vegan butter is cold. So pull this right out of the fridge when you're ready to use it. And we're going to do 4 tablespoons of the butter. And you can just drop it right into the bowl. And 4. All right. And what we're going to do is we're going to then use our fingers and we're going to mix in this butter and the dry ingredients. So the idea here is that you still want this to be cold. And what it's going to kind of resemble when you're done breaking up all the butter and it's completely immersed in, is kind of like wet sand on a beach. Okay, so that's the kind of consistency we're looking for. The flour itself should be cold from the butter. Now that the mixture resembles wet sand, I'm just going to add 1/4 milk at a time until I get a nice doughy consistency, and I should be able to create like a little ball out of this once I get it moist enough. All right, I have my dough spread out. It's about it's about 1 inch thickness from the counter. And now I'm just going to take a glass. I have a cocktail shaper because it's a little sharper on the edges. And I'm just going to then place this here, press down and give it a good turn. And then this will be one of my biscuits. I'm going to do that for as many biscuits as I can yield from this dough. And from every time you press down to make your new circle, just get as close to the dough as you can so you don't have to redo it and disturb it. All right, from that first cutting, I was able to get about 4 biscuits out of that. Have them right here. And now what I'm going to do, because I need it to be flat again, I'm just going to press this dough back together. And remember, you don't really want to knead it. All I'm doing is pressing it back together and getting it back to that inch thickness again. So then I can create more surface area to do the rest of my biscuit cutting. As you can see here, I was able to yield about 7 biscuits with the size of cup I used. So these are the ones that we're going to be working with. All right, I've now transferred the biscuits onto a baking sheet with parchment paper. And as you can see, I pressed all the biscuits together very, very closely. And that is important when you're cooking biscuits because it helps cook them all evenly together. The next thing we're going to do is just take a little bit of our butter and we're going to just make sure it kind of melts in our fingers a little bit. And we're just going to brush the tops with butter. So you want to make sure you do that for each of the biscuits. All right, the last thing we're going to do before we stick these in the oven is just take a finger and you're going to just press right down in the middle of each biscuit, just a small divot. And I'll show you how deep the divot is in just a second when I do an overhead view. What this is going to do is it's going to control the rise of the biscuit so it doesn't just turn out to be one big dome. We do want them to be slightly flat, but we don't want it to go too far over the top. All right, I'm ready to stick the biscuits into the oven now. As you can see, the divot size there, not very deep. And then we're going to just go ahead and put this in the oven now that it's been preheated. And we're going to cook these for about 10 to 15 minutes. Try to get this in the center rack, and then in the center rack of your oven, try to get it as central as possible. And then you'll just want to set a timer for 10 to 15 minutes. All right, while the biscuits are cooking in the oven, we're going to do a little prep work for the gravy. So I have my 3 cloves of garlic here. You just want to cut these when they're minced. Now that my garlic's minced, I'm going to move on to my onion, and I'm going to need half of my yellow onion. And you just want to make sure that these are diced. I have my onions and my garlic diced and minced, and now I'm going to take my rinsed mushrooms and I'm going to cut these into slices. I always do the mushroom face down. It gives me a little bit more control. And then I want about 2 cups of this. So I always have like a cup near handy so that I can keep going and measure as I go. Now that my mushrooms, onion, and garlic are cut, I'm going to add my walnuts. And what I like to do, first you'll need 4 tablespoons of this. And you can use them as the walnut chunks, halves, how you want it. But I like to make this even finer so it gets more flavor throughout and you have more of a nutty taste. So after I have my 4 tablespoons of walnuts in my bag, I'm now just going to close this. Take something you can, get the air out first, and then take something that you can use to crush this with, and try to get these as fine as possible. So it almost looks like a dust. So before I start cooking the gravy, I'm going to check on those biscuits to see how they look here. It's been 10 minutes. And look how great these look. Oh, perfect. They actually came out. This is probably my best batch yet. But you can see they're like high enough to cut. It's a little hot. I'll just do this really quickly. But like you can see that it's like golden brown on the top and the bottom. And these look fantastic. All right, now we're ready to cook the items we just prepped. So in the pan right here, in the saucepan, I have 4 tablespoons of melted butter, and some of it's already melted down. And I'm just going to spread that throughout the pan and make sure it's nice and coated. And then on a medium to high heat, I'm now going to add all of the ingredients into the saucepan that we just prepped. So the mushrooms, onion, and garlic. Along with the vegetables, I'm also going to add my walnut dust or walnut crumbles. Okay, and I want to stir all this in. And what we're looking for here is about 4 minutes or so, or until the onions are translucent before we go on to the next step. You also want to add a little bit of salt and pepper to taste. And I do like my gravy a bit on the peppery side, so that I am going heavy on. And then I'm also going to add some of my herbs. And that can be as herbaceous as you want it to be. All right, my onions are now translucent, so I'm ready to move on to my next step. I'm going to lower the heat so it's on a low. And now I'm going to take some flour, as I mentioned at the beginning here. We're going to use a little bit to coat the actual vegetables. So I've measured out here 4 tablespoons of flour, and you're simply going to sift this on to all of your veggies. And you're going to want to cook this on a low heat for at least 1 minute until all of the flour is completely dissolved. Now that the flour is dissolved, maintaining the same temperature, I'm going to slowly pour in 1 cup of the vegetable broth and whisk it in as I go. Now that my vegetable broth is immersed in with the vegetables, I'm going to start my last step, which is 1 cup of your plant milk. In fact, I'm using oat milk here. And I'm just going to pour in about 1/4 of a cup at a time, because this will determine how thick you want your gravy to be. Now, this is completely customizable. If you like a thinner gravy, then maybe add a little bit more milk. If you want it to be thicker, and you can actually turn up the heat just a little bit to see the thickness of the gravy, because it's going to need to cook in. And then you can determine how much milk you want to add as you go, depending on the thickness of the gravy that you want. The gravy has been cooking in a little bit of a simmer here for about 5 minutes, and it's starting to get a little thicker than I want. So I'm just going to add a little bit more, about 1/4 more of my milk to thin it out a little bit. and then you'll just keep cooking that until you get to the desired consistency you want. Also, make sure that you're tasting it as you go to make sure the salt and pepper levels and the herb levels are where you want it to be. All right, my gravy's at its desired thickness and seasoned correctly, so I went ahead and took a plate and I split one of my biscuits in half. And now I'm ready to turn off the heat for now so it doesn't cook any further. Grab a nice spoonful of however much you want and put it right there on the biscuits. I like a little extra gravy on mine. All right, so although quite a few steps, they're all easy steps, and the ingredients that I use for this recipe are definitely affordable. They do not cost that much, and it is a process, but I feel like hopefully the way that I showed you doesn't complicate it too much. And here is the result. Delicious biscuits and gravy. Delicious mushroom gravy. Can't wait to give this a try. Fantastic. The flakiness of the biscuit with the creaminess of the gravy, and you get a little bit of that walnut taste in there. Oh, it's so good. For storage of the gravy, just make sure you have an airtight container that you can put in the fridge. I would give that about 3 to 5 days. Once you cook the gravy again, make sure you adjust the seasoning level and the milk to thicken it back up again. And then for the biscuits, airtight container as well, about 5 days for that. All right, that concludes this episode. I hope you enjoy. Make sure you hit the alert bell to stay abreast of all the new videos I'll be coming out with in the later weeks. Subscribe, like, and until then, I'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.